Hi, my name is Colleen Myers. I'm a recovering judgmental church lady, and I'm glad you've joined me for this episode of the Smack Dab podcast, living smack dab in the center of God's will. My name is Colleen. I'm a recovering judgmental church lady, and I want to thank you for joining me today on this episode of the Smack Dab podcast. I love what we're talking about today because we are going to talk about when Joshua led the Israelites across the Jordan River. It was an impossible thing to do, but God made it possible. And we're talking about how important it is for us to remember, to come up with a way to remember those impossible things that God does in our lives, and how important it is to share those God stories with other people, and with our families and with generations to come. So we're going to talk about a few ideas of ways to do that. But let's open to Joshua chapter 3, where we find the Israelites just poised on the edge of the Jordan River. It's an impossible thing for this huge group of people, these 12 tribes, to cross the Jordan River, this huge, big, super deep, huge river. And yet God tells Joshua to lead the people across. And he gives some really specific directions to Joshua. He tells them to take a few steps into the river. And then he has Joshua tell the people, today you will know that the living God is among you. And then as soon as their feet touched that river, they had to step into the river first. And then as soon as their feet touched the river, the flow was cut off, and the river stood up like a wall on both sides of them. And some of them, the priests were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and they were told to stand in the middle of the river with the Ark of the Covenant. And now this river no longer had water in it. It was totally dry. And the people were to pass by onto the other side while the priests stood there with the Ark of the Covenant. And hopefully I'm not botching this story too much. I'm trying not to read a whole 2 chapters. Really, it's Joshua chapter 3 and chapter 4 that if you want to read this story, I'm just giving the highlights, hopefully without botching it too badly. But after the people had all crossed the Jordan, now we're in chapter 4 of Joshua. The Lord told Joshua to choose 12 men, one from each tribe, and tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. So now the people have already crossed, but the priests are still standing in the middle of this dry river now that once was rushing, raging, full of water. And he tells these people to go back and choose 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, carry them out and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight. And the reason that he has them do this is because he says in verse 6 of chapter 4, we will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? And then you can tell them, they remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people forever. And I love backing up to what I've already read from chapter 3, verse 10. Today you will know that the living God is among you. And I just wanted to talk today about how important it is that God commanded the people to create a monument to what he had done. When they knew for sure that God was among them, when he was so present in their lives, that they were in an impossible situation that God made possible. And God instructs them to go back and take stones from that impossible place and build a monument of remembrance when God caused something so amazing to happen that was a total miracle. And I am just going to encourage you today to look back in your life. What are the things that happen in your life that you were in an impossible situation, and yet God made a way for you to cross this impossible situation? And just like God instructed the tribes to build this monument, how are some ways that you can build a monument for your children to hear these God stories of how He made a way for you? What are some ways that you can do that practically? Um, uh, I wanted to suggest a couple of ways. A friend of mine literally writes things that God does for her and her family on stones. She uses those little smooth stones that you can buy at Home Depot or Lowe's to use in your garden. Those little smooth stones that come in huge bags. And she has a bag of those, and she every once in a while will reach in that bag. She'll keep it in her garage, and then she'll reach in that bag and pull out a stone, and she'll take a permanent marker and she'll write what God did for their family. She'll write events that are special in her family, that could have only happened if God hadn't intervened, or they were special blessings that God provided. And she'll write them on those stones, and she has this giant jar or bowl on her coffee table with these stones of remembrance on there, and she dates the back of each stone, with the story on the front. I just think that's such a cool idea. Um, I have done this in the past when I've scrapbooked. Now, I have decided, since God called me to this rave outreach ministry, Engaged to Go Ministries, 16 years ago is when God called my husband and I to start this ministry. And you can hear more about it if you go to raveoutreach.com and click on the section what we're about. But God called us to this 16 years ago, and I used to be totally into scrapbooking, and all my free time I was making these magnificent scrapbook albums and spending all this time on each page. And God just talked to me about that and how I was spending my time, and I didn't want to be doing scrapbooks when the Lord returned. So I stopped doing that. And now I just throw photos in albums, and even that I have a hard time keeping up on. We're so busy with other stuff. But what I did with those scrapbooks is a lot of times I would write God stories in the pages. And it was like a stone of remembrance that I was creating, because hopefully my great-grandchildren will be able to see these scrapbooks someday that I work so hard on. I'm hoping that my kids don't throw them out someday when I go be with Jesus. But there are, on those pages, there are stories, there are God stories, there's Bible verses. And so if you're into that, and God hasn't told you to stop like He did me, but if you're into that, there's nothing sinful about doing scrapbooks. Um, but maybe try to turn them into a legacy for your great grandchildren, who hopefully will read those pages someday and tell the stories of what God did. Um, another way that people do this is they keep a journal. Another way I've seen people do this is they write stories in the pages of their Bible, things that hopefully their children won't get rid of someday, that they'll keep, and then those stories are recorded. And of course, tell these stories by mouth to your children and your grandchildren. Share the things that God has done. God wants us to do that. He asked Joshua to do this. And so I believe that this is a request that's true for us today too. Don't forget those things that God has done for you, because they will be an encouragement as you share those stories with the next generations. They will be an encouragement for those people. They can say, my Grammy shared this story with me about what God did for her when she was in high school or she was in college. And so I can have faith that God is the same God today for me in my situation. So just be sure that you make those stones of remembrance somehow in your life for generations to come. Thanks for joining me today on the Smack Dab Podcast. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Smack Dab Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and check out our latest episodes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Smack Dab Podcast. If this has been a blessing to you, please consider helping us continue by making a donation to our sponsor at engagetogoministries.com.